Hi everyone. Today I wanted to broach the subject of pivot tables, pivot charts. They used to be in Access, and if you go into the newer versions of Access, you'll notice they're no longer there. They haven't been there for several versions now. And the question is, how do we get that functionality back? What can we do? Because in some instances, pivot tables, pivot charts were just exceptional. They allow easy access to information, and you can visualize it in different ways, and they just were good features. It still is possible to do pivot tables, etc. in Excel. Why can't we do it in Access, which is our database manager, our interface, our front end on top of it? So today I'm going to broach one way of doing it, and I do plan on coming back with another possible approach to creating pivot tables, etc. in Excel through automation, but that will be for a later video. Today, I'm going to show you, just like I've said in previous videos, how powerful the web browser control truly can be. And today I'm going to show you how we can go about integrating web pivot tables, pivot charts into an Access database to regain some of those features we lost. So before going any further, let's just confirm what I am saying. If we go on Microsoft's support page for discontinued features in Access 2013, as you can see, we just scroll down a little bit, you'll see right here, pivot charts, pivot tables. There's no option to create pivot charts, pivot tables in Access 2013. So they as of 2013, discontinued it. So if you are still running 2010 or earlier possibly, well, you may still have those options, but just know, moving forward, you're going to lose them. Okay, so now that that's being said, I'm going to once again come back to my web page regarding web browsers. This is the heart of the matter. All the information you need for what I'm going to show you today is contained here, and I will put up a web page with a demo file, the file that I'm going to show you today. So you'll be able to see all the code, the different examples. So don't worry about copying things and retyping right now. Just pay attention. But everything I've done, the way I built up this demo, it's all because of this page. All the information you need is here. Everything is covered. If you haven't seen my previous video on the web browser control, I highly recommend you do. But like I say, all the information is here. Now, I want to utilize the web browser. I know there's got to be a way, there's got to be tools out there that exist. So I did a Google search, I went looking, it really wasn't hard. And I came across this JavaScript project, pivottable.js. So I came across this page, and you can also check, he has a GitHub repository. I'll provide all the links, don't worry about it. But as you can see just by his animated GIFs, this is perfect. I can interact with the data live. I can change the charts. I can change what columns and rows are being displayed. This is perfect for my needs, at least. So how do we take this and get it into Access? Well, the first thing that I did, I went into his examples, and I just went through trying to see which ones could possibly be of interest. And, you start off with the simple one, maybe the simple one with a UI. And eventually I also ended up with the plotty one, which is, it's another rendering engine for being able to do some of the graphics. We're going to get into it. I'm going to show you all how this works, but I'm just showing you the basic logic. But basically, he provides several examples. I looked at them, dissected them, tried to see what could be useful to me. Obviously, with what I'm going to show you today, I haven't implemented all of these different options. So you may see something in the examples that I haven't implemented. With my demo, you should be able to implement it. You should be able to go into that HTML file, see how it was done, and just modify what needs to be modified in my demo in the HTML, and you should be up and running, because that's how I've done my 3 or 4 examples. It's just always the same basic concept. It's just the HTML changes slightly. Okay, knowing that that's how it's all done, let's look at the concrete example. So when I zip this all up, you're going to notice you're going to have a database. You're going to have two folders. I have a public folder. This is just where I copy the raw information. So you're going to see you're going to have the raw library with everything. It's going to have the source, the distribution, the examples, all sorts of stuff. I'll have a couple links, like I said, to his GitHub, to his webpage with examples. But for actually making the system work, what you need is the database and the HTML. Those are the two things that work together. The public is just there as a reference. It says documentation. And if we go into the HTML, so you understand how it's structured, you're going to have the pivot table JS. So I made a separate folder to keep all of that separate. And in there, you have the distribution folder that has all of the different libraries that are required depending on what features you're trying to use. So depending on what features you want, you're going to be using this JS versus that JS. But as I said, I'm going to show you that in just a second. Then, if we come back to HTML, I also have a separate JS folder where I have the jQuery, the jQuery UI, and also the basic plotty libraries. So they're used to generate the visuals and to give us interaction, be able to drag and drop and do things like that. But they're independent of the actual pivot chart and table JS. So I've kept them separate. So if ever at a later date he comes out with a new version, it would be as simple as just coming in here and changing the distribution folder. And you'd instantaneously have any new features he's dropped. Okay, so let's get into it. As I said, everything's contained in the database. And nothing in this is specific to a bitness. So when I say that is, this should run both on 32-bit and 64-bit regardless. I'm not using any APIs, nothing in there that can cause any issues. We're not using ActiveX. We're using the native web browser control. So it's as simple as creating a form. So let's open the first example. Creating a form with a web browser control in it. And then in this case, I'm using an event, as you can see here, the load event, to pass HTML into it to render what we want. Okay, so what are we wanting to render exactly? Well, we need some data. So just for this case, I've created two tables. Now, I'm using tables. It can be queries. It's just a question of we have to have the data that we need that we want to represent in a pivot chart or a pivot table. I'm going to use tables. As you'll see later, I did generate some queries, and we're going to use that in our third example just to show it can be either or. And they're very basic. I created a table that has gender, age, and province. It's all bogus, just random data I just threw in there. And in another example, I took from his GitHub, actually, I took a sample copy of the Montreal weather from 2014. So you have dates, you have temperatures, rainfall, snowfall, etc. So it's just, this is the data I want to represent visually. It can be anything. So let's see how this works. And like I said, all of this is controlled by the onload event. So I come here, let's open up the VBA. And what am I doing? So I'm creating an object, just to simplify coding, that I've named WebBrowser object. And then with it, with the document, I'm opening it and I'm passing it, I'm writing to it the value of a function called genPivotTable. Okay. So down here, I have the genPivotTable function. And if you look at it just quickly, I'm building up an HTML string. So I'm building up an HTML page. As you can see here, doctype HTML, then I have a header section. I build up a body section. I close my HTML, and I return that HTML, which is a complete web page. I'm returning a complete web page here and writing it to the web browser control document. So that's what we're doing. We're dynamically generating the HTML and passing it to the web browser to display. So what are we generating as HTML? Well, as I said, it's a standard HTML document, and it's entirely based on his example. And if we look at it, you'll see here, this is just generic stuff, the title, metadata for contact type and viewport. Okay, that's all fine. Where it starts off is it starts off here. We start off adding scripts to the jQuery min, to the jQuery min UI, to the distribution. Remember pivot table.js distribution pivot CSS, and to the pivot table distribution pivot.js. So we add those in the headers, and it has access to the proper resources, and it can generate the view properly. Then there's some styling here. We're using the Verdanus font family. And then we come here and in our body, we start off our script that's going to actually create the chart. And I want it based on, in my case, in this example, on a table. So I'm coming here and I'm opening the table. I'm grabbing it all for this case. And I'm passing and building up the data. So I'm building up, it's an array in the web language where I'm putting the gender and its value, the age and its value, the province and its value. And I'm doing that looping, as you can see, record by record until I've gone through the entire table. So I'm basically creating this massive array of the data coming from the table. And then once I've got that, I'm taking that array and I'm passing it back to the HTML because I want that to be in this section here. I want it to be, we're building an array. So I'm creating the data and then I'm passing it back to my HTML. I finish specifying what I need in the script. And then I have this div, which is the output div, and we wrap it up. Because if we look just a little bit higher, our script, our function that we're using to generate the chart is going to use that div, the output div. So we have to have an output div for it to render the chart or pivot table. So let's take a look at this. In practice, how does it actually work? What does it give us? So we double click on it and it's gone, and it's put here province, and it's put it against the gender and age. So as you can see here, we have gender and age on our two columns here, and our provinces go across the top row. Now let's say, okay, this is beautiful, but I only want gender. I don't need the breakdown by age. You just drag it up to the area, and now you've got it just broken down by gender. Oh, I didn't want that. I want it by age. Now you've got it broken down by age. Oh, I don't really care about provinces. I want it by gender. Now you have the genders by age. So as you can see, you have total control over the rows and columns. And you can come in, even click on one and say, oh, right now I'm just interested in my female values. Anyway, you get the idea here. You have complete control over what's happening or not happening. And you have different options here. You can come and say, I want a heat map. So you can see, obviously with a small subset of data, it's not as visual, but when you get larger data sets, such type of heat maps can be very interesting. But you get the general idea. We're taking our table and we're transforming it into a pivot table that you can then play around with. Okay, so that's the first example. The second example, let's take a look at what the result is, and then we'll go see what I changed in the code. If we open it up, we're still dealing with our demographics table. But as you can see now, I've got a bar chart. Let's open up the first example for a second again. I don't have a bar chart. I have a table bar chart, but that's not a bar chart. If we come back here, I still have a table bar chart, but no, we're on a, look at the different options we now have. We have stacked, line, area. We didn't have that previously, okay? So we've got new options, new capability, graphing capabilities. And if you come over here, you now have this bar that shows up that allows you to do things. You can save it as an image. And you can do and like I said, you can do all sorts of other things on top of everything we could previously do. The drag and drop, the change what is being displayed or not being displayed, et cetera, et cetera. We just added new features. Okay, how did I do that? Like I said, it's all controlled in the HTML. So if I come back up here, if you remember correctly, here we're using the Pivot CSS and the Pivot JS. On the second one, it's the same setup. If we come down here, I now have added the Plotty renderer, and that's what's giving us this ability to add new charts. So first thing was I had to add that. And then you're going to see here, we come down to the function. So let's go down to the function on our first example. And in the first function, we went Pivot UI, and then I went right into building the data set. Well, before I do that here, I define some variables, okay? The renderer, and as you can see here, we're using the Plotty renderer. And then I generate my data set, that's fine. But then you'll see down here, I also then added in the renderers. I'm using that variable that we defined up here. And the renderer name, I'm telling it by default, when you open up, use the bar chart. You can set it to whatever you like. You can set it to the table. You can set it to a heat map. It's your choice. I set it to the bar chart just for this example to show that you can control the default. And that's basically it. So you define a couple variables, you apply those variables, like I said here, to your renderer. I define what the default view I want, and as a result, we get this. So once again, how did I know how to do all of this? It was I looked at his example file, and I implemented the exact same HTML that he used, basically, and I changed it to the values that I wanted. As per the usual in VBA, you have to be careful with the quotes, obviously. So whenever he had a quote, you have to double it up, right? That's the only way it shows up properly. But you'll see if you don't get the quoting right when you go and apply it, you're going to get JavaScript errors when you try to view it. And then the easiest way to address that is you put it in here, let's say a debug.print shtml. So when you run it, okay, let's run this, sure. So I run it. If I come back to my VBA, I have the raw HTML here. So then I can take this and I can put it in a plain text file, rename it as HTML file, and I can run it and see where the issue is, and I can review my quotations and make sure everything's good, okay? But it really is a question of I look at his examples and then I modified what I previously had. And that's really what it came down to. Now, this is beautiful. I'm really happy we're making headway here. And like I said, you have total control on everything. So you can go about doing any changes you want. You can switch back over to your table. You can do everything you want, you know. So there you go. But I wanted to take it further. Okay, so what can we do to take it further? Well, these are all hard-coded. I had to hard-code the table name. I had to hard-code the fields that we're using, right? Gender, age, province. You know, it's nice, but I'd like to make it more flexible for my users. I'd like them to be able to pick a table. I'd like them to be able to pick the fields to view or not view. So that's what I did. And that's what the third example is. So the third example here is in two parts. Now, I could incorporate them all into one, and maybe I'll end up doing that. But for today, I wanted to keep them separate. I have a main form, which will then generate the pivot. Okay, so you open the main form, and as you can see here, select the source table or query. So the first thing to do is, what do you want to visualize? So let's start off by the case of what we've already seen in example 1 and 2. Let's take our demographics. The minute you do that, you'll see 3 list box here with the lists of the fields. So if you look here, you have gender, age, province, and ID. ID, gender, you have the fields that show up in that table. And it says here, what do you want to see in the rows? And what do you want to see in the columns by default? So let's just say I want to see my age. I want to see the province. Here it says, by default, what other fields might you want to have in the chart? They may not be actively used in the column, but they're in that section at the top that you can drag should you want them. And then it's really a choice. You can leave it blank, or you can say, hey, I want to have access to everything. And then I'll decide what I want to do. And you press View Pivot. And as you see, we picked gender and province, but later here I also picked the age, you see? So now the age, although it's not in the column in the row, it shows up here. It's accessible to us. Let me demonstrate. Let's undo this. Let's just say we're doing the province, which we already picked anyway. So we're not including age anywhere. Watch what happens. It's not available to us because we didn't say we wanted it just in case. But if we say we want it, now it's going to show up. It's available. It's not currently actively used, but it's there if we want it. And then it's the same as previously in example 2. You can drag and drop. You can change your the type of chart. You can go back to your data table. You can do whatever you want. Okay? So you have the same capabilities, but now you have the flexibility as you can give to your users that they are in full control. You don't have to hard code every single example. Let's take another concrete example. Let's base it off of a query I built. In the query, this is set up by date. Excuse me. The table is set up by date. And I didn't want to break it down by date. I want to break it down by month. So I came here and I just created a simple query that, as you can see, breaks it down by month instead and creates averages and things like that. Okay, knowing that, I picked my rows. I want the month name. I want the max temp. And I want to see everything. I want to have access to all the information. So let's see what this gives. We click on View Pivot. And now we see this. Now, what we want is we need to go get the proper chart. So just be careful. But this is all in playing around with the pivot table and the pivot chart. As you can see, you'll get the visualization as long as you're using the right views. Similarly, as you can see, or I want to see my pivot table. So you get the idea of how this works. Now your user has complete flexibility. As I said, you could integrate all of this onto one form with the web browser below. You could create it in the section where you define the tables and fields, could minimize and maximize. There's all sorts of things you could do. But as you can see, you have full control here. The other thing I wanted to show, if we go to the code specifically for that example, so we go to number 3, it generates the HTML in the main, okay? And then what you're seeing here, like I said, it generates it and then it passes it to the second form after it opened it. So when you click that pivot button, it opens the form, then it generates and passes it back to the form it just opened, okay? But it's actually generated in the main. And if we come down here, you'll see it's the same general idea. I'm using the plotty. It's the same as number 2. But to make it flexible, like I said, previously this was hard-coded, okay? Let's look at the select statement. So if we look here, I was just going and grabbing a table. But now to make it flexible, they can give me now any table, any query. So I needed to convert this now into a select statement. Go use whatever the user tells me to use. And to reduce the amount of data we're passing back and forth, best practice, we only want to pull specific fields. So that's why up here, I'm generating lists of what are the columns that were selected, what were the rows that were selected, and what were the other fields that were selected. And then I'm using them here to build my select statement. You'll also notice a lot of bracketing. Why do I have all this bracketing? It's because if people use spaces in their field names, table names, we have to surround them in brackets or else it will not work. So that's why here you're going to see it looks a little funky. But if you do what I did, the debug print, you'll see. Let me see if I have one that's here. Let's delete this. Let's run it. You'll see. Let's pull demographics. Just generate it. Now if we come here and we look up at the top, select, you see how it's put everything between brackets, including the table name. Okay? And then, like I said previously, you have all of your information, your files that it's using, etc., etc., etc. Okay? So there's nothing hidden here. Like I said, I started with my example 1, then I built out to number 2, just a few additions. Then I built out to number 3. It's the same general concept, but once again here, I had to make it more flexible by inserting a select statement instead of hard coding a specific value where all these extra brackets came into consideration. But it's the same basic idea as example 2. So that basically sums up how we can integrate pivot tables, pivot charts back into Access with pretty much great ease, just using a simple web browser control. So I hope this helps a few of you out there. I'll see, maybe I can do a couple more examples. I'll have to see if time permits me here. Just want to thank you all for having watched through the video. Please leave me comments below. Let me know what you think. Give me some ideas of other videos you'd like to see on my channel. Give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you don't mind. It will go a long way in permitting me to continue developing such materials. And take care, guys. See you in the next video.